Why, hello folks! It's time for another Helminth build guide. It's been a while. It's been a minute or so since I've made one of these. You know, partly because as time passes on and you know, more people sort of like experiment more with the Helminth system, things start getting figured out, right? And it gets harder and harder to come up with like new ideas and stuff that people haven't done before. But hey, we'll soon get a new Warframe. Sevagoth is coming soon with a new ability that, you know, we can just start theory crafting again. Whenever there's a new Warframe out, we just gotta like figure out how we're gonna chuck this into the Helminth system. But today we're doing Ember. And to that point, what I was talking about, I'm actually gonna pick a build that, like, this has been experimented with already, but only like in passing. Like a couple of months ago, Faceless Beanie put out a video with a couple of different Ember Helminth build suggestions, and one of them was Breach Surge, but and that's the one we're going with here too, but he only sort of mentioned it in passing, and you know, didn't put too much time into it, into that specific one. And no one else really seems to have sort of picked up on this ability synergy either. And I figured, like, he's on to something here, people. and it's kind of cool figuring out like how to actually utilize Breach Surge in a good way on different Warframes. For example, I have a previous video with Breach Surge Sarin, where I sort of like, you know, concluded that it's not a good damage dealing ability for her. It's good because it's like a crowd control ability. It stuns enemies and it gives radiation procs and blinds them and stuff like that. And that helps with survivability. And that sure is the case for Ember as well. But in Ember's case, it actually does quite a lot of damage. It functions a bit differently from how it works with Sarin, for example. Here, let me show you. Obviously, with Breach Surge, you always kinda want to experiment with it whenever you're dealing with a Warframe that has like a damage over time ability, because the Surge sparks synergize very well with that. So let's just push up her immolation to 100% or 90% so that we can armor strip. So I'm just gonna show you first, like, because, like, hey, her Inferno does a ton of damage, even without Breach Surge. But it does even more with it, so I'm just gonna show you this. So first up, I have a sword with Exodia Hunt, so we're just gonna pull all the enemies together with a slam attack. There we go. Now, strip all their armor, and Inferno. Missed one over there. But it took about 8 seconds or so to kill all of them. So, you know, that's obviously respectable. Now, do the same thing, but with Breach Surge in the mix as well. So, first, slam attack. Come on. Come on, proc Exodia Hunt. Thank you. And then, armor strip, Breach Surge, Inferno. Now, as you can see, that is considerably faster. That is, we're talking killing all of them in like 2 seconds instead of 8 seconds. So that's because of the Surge sparks from Breach Surge. Now, when I did this test before, in my previous video with Sarin, I concluded that, like, Breach Surge didn't actually kill enemies faster. Whether I, like, when you use the spores, whether I use Breach Surge or not, the actual kill time is pretty much exactly the same anyway. And that is, like, because of how the damage is distributed and how it scales. With Sarin, the spores start off doing kind of low damage. And then it ticks up over time and does more and more damage over time. But that's not how Inferno works. Inferno doesn't scale up over time. Instead, it just has a pretty high initial damage, and then it has a static damage per second, which is also pretty high. So all the damage is sort of front-loaded. You don't have to wait for it to come. Like, it comes pretty much immediately. And the thing about Breach Surge and how it works, right, when it says that it has a damage multiplier, what that is the sparks. If you hit an enemy and you do an attack that creates a surge spark, then that spark is going to jump to the next enemy, and that spark is going to deal damage with that multiplier, and it's going to be the same damage that the enemy took. So if you hit them in the head with like a Rubico Prime or something and like do like 1,000,000 damage in one shot, and then that creates a surge spark that jumps to an enemy, yeah, that's going to do like a pretty big hit on whatever it hits. So, if you do like a really, really small amount of damage, and then the surge spark that's going to jump over is going to hit an enemy with this multiplier, but it's going to be a pretty small amount of damage that gets multiplied. So, people think that this ability just like adds a damage multiplier to whatever you do to enemies that are affected by it. No, that's not at all how it works. It's just the one spark that jumps from one enemy to the next that gets a multiplier on its damage. But that means, if you have an ability like Inferno, that actually sort of like just hits like a truck, and also has a damage over time effect that hits like a truck, then these surge sparks are also gonna be hitting like trucks. And what's nice about them is that like, they have a certain, like, chance to happen. So if I were to, like, Breach Surge these enemies here, see? Whenever I hit them with something, every pop, like, has an there. It has, like, a chance to create a surge spark that jumps back and forth. So if you have a damage over time effect, then you constantly get more and more chances to create sparks. So if I just throw out an Inferno, as you can see, there's going to be like sparks flying everywhere, because these guys are under like damage over time effects. They're getting ticks of damage all the time. So these surge sparks are just flying in every direction. They're spawning constantly. So that's great. But then you also want to obviously, you know, strip their armor and stuff to actually start doing damage, because these are corrupted heavy gunners. So even like, oh, I forgot to strip the armor. Haha, there we go. Now all the armor is gone. Like, these sparks are insane. They are ludicrous. They are just jumping between enemies and just wiping them out. So I took it for a spin in the steel path and just tested like the damage output, and it is fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic. You might struggle a little bit with like acolytes and stuff, but that's what your melee weapon is for. Hey. But just, you know, killing enemies with this. Oh yeah. This is the sort of like damage output that Ember really needed to become steel path viable. Not to mention that Breach Surge at the same time also grants more survivability, more crowd control, because enemies are going to be blinded, they're going to be rad procced, so they're going to be shooting at each other instead of shooting at you. That's fantastic. So let's look at the actual build I'm using. I'm running a Miter, but that's just because, hey, I was doing Steel Path Survival on Mott, and nullifiers are a problem. So you need some way of dealing with nullifiers. A Miter with the Neutralizing Justice mod can take care of nullifiers immediately when you see them. Other than that, I'm not killing enemies with my weapons. I'm just killing enemies with abilities. I'm not even using my weapons. just to like pop nullifiers, basically. And as for Ember herself, I have built her for a hefty amount of power strength, because that scales well with Inferno, scales well with Breach Surge. You don't need all that much power strength to get like 100% armor reduction or 90% damage reduction. But it just makes your Inferno and your Breach Surge stronger, so that's good. You want to run with maximum efficiency on Ember. You want to just crank that up, because Immolation, that's your damage reduction. You want it at 90%, but hey, that means you're gonna start draining energy really fast. So you gotta like deplete it all the time with Fire Blast, and that costs energy, and you have to spam Inferno all the time. And depending on how many enemies you hit, it costs more and more energy. So, you want your abilities to cost as little as possible, because you are spamming abilities. You are pressing your ability buttons all the time. All the time. Range is fine the way it is. It has a hefty amount of range as it is. 25 meters is pretty good. Breach Surge at 18 meters. That's pretty good. If you want to, you could try to squeeze more range into the build. I don't really know how I would do that, but I guess you can fiddle with it. You don't need any duration, really. Duration would only sort of like be a thing for Breach Surge, for that to last longer, but that's fine because, again, you are spamming. You are spamming abilities, so you're casting and recasting every single second anyway. If I were to put more form into this, I wouldn't run Steel Charge, because I'm not killing enemies with my melee weapon. Anyway, probably just toss in Crow... Nah, you know what? Why Corrosive Prediction? I'm just armor stripping enemies all the time anyway. So, what you have in this slot probably isn't super important, to be honest. Arcane Energize is nice, but Exothermic is where you get your energy from. It's a very important mod, which means that enemies that are killed while under the effect of Inferno have a chance to drop energy orbs. And hey, guess what? Every enemy on the screen all the time is going to be under the effect of Inferno. So having this just means that you're just going to be swimming in energy orbs, which is great. And Arcane Energize makes it so that when you pick up an energy orb, you have a pretty good chance of just completely refilling your energy bar. So you're always going to be running at max energy. But that's fine, because you're spamming, and you can't run out of energy for a second, so because then you die. Arcane Grace, together with Adaptation, together with your number 2 ability to put like a 90% damage reduction on top of that. That's pretty much all you need for survivability. It works nice. I'm also running an Umbral Vitality because, hey, I need a bit more health to just make sure I just don't get one-shotted or something. If you feel ballsy, I guess you can run without it, but I'm not sure I would. But that's about it. That's about it for the build. It's like, Ember is very straightforward, right? Her number 2 ability, have that active all the time, and you just get your 90% damage reduction. You have your heat meter in the bottom. You use your abilities that create heat, and they're gonna ramp it up. Once it's ramped up, everything is on fire like this. Woo! And over time, as you're gonna see down in the bottom right, it's gonna start draining my energy, and it's gonna start draining my energy more and more over time. So I have to vent some of the heat by using my number 3 ability, which also armor strips enemies, and it stops the energy drain for a while. And then when you start draining energy again, you gotta vent some heat. But once you've like done Inferno enough times, it's gonna like reheat itself pretty much immediately. So as you can see here, it won't take long until you're back up to 90% damage reduction. And that's what you need to do your 100% armor strip anyway. Fireball is her number 1 skill that I replaced, and that's pretty obvious. It's the one skill in her kit that you kind of never really use. It's like single target damage, but it's kind of redundant when you have Inferno, because Inferno kills everything. So I put Breach Surge there instead. And, you know, just set everything on fire. And you run around being on fire as well, and that's cool. Yeah, she's a hottie. So she used to be a girl with an ability set that made her excellent for like just wiping trash mobs and clearing low to mid-level content. But with this like very, very considerable damage boost that she gets from incorporating Breach Surge into her kit, she's up there now. She is absolutely up there with the heavy hitters in the damage department, which is neat. But so yeah, that's the build. That's the build, and you know I'll see you again tomorrow for something completely different.